somebody.
Welcome to the Swamp Kingdom, where people get to eat, develop their businesses, work hard, and occasionally beat each other with clubs. Everyone wants to live in such a wonderful kingdom, so people come here from the surrounding villages, and everything is looked after by none other than Shrek himself, the ruler of the swamp.
What are you doing in my swamp?
Well, he does get mad sometimes, but that's no reason to run away, is it? My name is Onion King, and today I'm going to show you the real Swamp Kingdom, where these poor people so eagerly arrive, unaware that this ogre is preparing an unpleasant surprise for them. I will, of course, be playing Manor Lords, which is probably the most popular city builder of the past few months. However, in order to spice things up a bit and speed up the gameplay, I've installed a whole bunch of mods. Hence the look. Unfortunately, no one has yet created a model of a walking onion with a crown on its head. Anyway, in the first step, I made my own crest, which fitted perfectly, didn't it? This guy looked almost like Shrek, so I chose his portrait. Unfortunately, adding custom portraits is quite complicated, and I wasn't up to the task. Most importantly, I was able to move on to the construction of the Swamp Kingdom, which already had a few citizens ready to work hard at the start. Well, okay, actually they preferred to bum around. But it's better not to mess with such a ruler, because it can end badly. All he has to do is walk up and everyone knows what to do. Unfortunately, the character in this game constantly wants to turn his back to the camera, so it was hard for me to show you his face, but I guess everyone can see it's Shrek, right? Unfortunately, we didn't have a donkey yet, so we had to go with this ox. Enough with the inactivity. The Swamp Kingdom isn't going to build itself, is it? And there was another guy here who also wanted to take over these lands.
Like that's ever gonna happen.
And did I tell you that in addition to the mods, I also installed a console commands? That way I could, for example, add lots of deer to the map. Somehow I had to encourage people to live in my kingdom. See? It works. I simply installed a mod that added an event with refugees wanting to join the village from time to time. Only so far, somehow, I haven't seen them anywhere. And as for the deer, they were a bit of a problem for people because they had to walk through them. But nobody said the residents would have an easy life. There were logs right here, so possibly the construction of anything was slowed down by these deer. Of course, Shrek watched everything and didn't help with anything himself, because he was king here after all. As for the building of the kingdom, I have decided that I will make circles like this one in order to place houses here. In the meantime, Hildebolt wrote to me hoping to achieve anything. I could not reply to him differently. After a while, I found the immigrants were joining my village. At least they had the tools they needed to work right away. Slowly, the workers were finishing the construction of the woodcutter's hut. This allowed us to cut down nearby trees in a rather unsafe way. I needed more roads to build houses for these poor refugees. At least these roads made it easier to make nice estates. Therefore, I needed even more of them, because the Swamp Kingdom had to look nice, right? However, at the moment, I couldn't afford to design that many houses. We had to wait for people to cut down some trees, and even more refugees showed up in my village right away with shovels. That's the kind of people I like, ready to work at any time of day or night, no matter where they are at the moment or what problems they might encounter. Of course, they had to be watched because Shrek didn't trust anyone. You see? No one! Anyway, let's hope everyone does a good job here. For the time being, most of them continued to bum around, but it was only a matter of time when they would all have something to do. Some of the workers even had wooden carts already. We were slowly building a granary to make sure the food wouldn't spoil while lying on the ground. Currently, this was a possibility. In theory, our food could also be eaten by those deer, but it doesn't seem to work like that. In the days following, even more refugees turned up, lured by the prospect of free meat walking around the village. In the center of my village, I wanted to make a big market, but at the moment that wasn't possible because of the raw materials lying there, which had to be removed. After a while, I realized that I had not named my village. From now on, it was SHREK'S SWAMP. Wanting to get rid of the logs lying in the center of the village, I designed even more houses for my refugees. I even had hunters already. So from that point on, nobody in the village had to worry about food. Merciful Shrek provided plenty of meat for his people. Of course, it was a trap, but no one needs to know that right now. In these first houses, I had them do vegetable gardens so that they would have something extra to eat. Soon it would be their only food. That's why it's better for them to eat meat while they still can. It was up to Shrek how many deer would be here. After a while, I gained the first development point for the village. I could now choose one of the improvements for my kingdom, and since I had a lot of deer, the best choice was traps, giving even more meat. I set up a livestock trading post in the village, in which I wanted to buy a mule that would pretend to be a donkey. As you can see, the deer didn't help build the village. At least people started working in their vegetable gardens so they would have something to eat in the near future. Now I was mainly waiting for the logs to be taken away from here so I could make a big market. And when that finally happened, I designated the whole area to make a market there with all the stalls. The locals immediately rushed in to start selling their products to others. Although no one was here at first, so Shrek had to serve himself. Eventually, a woman came along carrying firewood, but Shrek didn't need that. A while later, we got a mule in the village, whom we will call a donkey for the purposes of this video. I could even call it, he may not look like a donkey, but he's a donkey, right? Can you see the passion? Maybe we'd better leave them alone. Interestingly, this ox probably wanted to make a sacrifice so that the villagers would certainly not run out of meat. The question is, what the woman was doing. Well, okay, she wasn't the only one who had a problem. I don't know, maybe they really wanted to eat the meat. Anyway, my hunters had a fairly easy task, as the animals were waiting for them not far from their camp. All they had to do was aim well. And can you see what a wonderful kingdom SHREK'S SWAMP is? Unfortunately, it wasn't quite perfect, as there were bandits on the map who occasionally robbed us. Clearly, they had not yet become familiar with Shrek. Unfortunately, although an encounter was possible, it didn't change much because no one here could see Shrek. Maybe he doesn't exist. If I could, I would have shown them that this wasn't the place for them. But the best I could do was watch them fight each other out of boredom. Do you want to hear something strange? Do you also think it was a human screaming? Maybe the deer were once human and it's all Shrek's fault? Seriously, I didn't add that sound while editing. I think we might already be worried. Anyway, the village had to be developed further, with more paths being created around the center. So far, what we had managed to build looked very nice, didn't it? Sometimes I wasn't sure if my villagers knew what they were doing, but no one had hurt themselves yet. Generally, I think some people were afraid of Shrek because they would rudely lock their doors in front of him and it was impossible to enter their houses. Each day the deer got closer and closer, probably trying to block the passage if someone wanted to pass through. Of course, such tricks did not affect Shrek. Admittedly, I almost managed to hide between them. Eventually, a church had to be built in order to expand the kingdom even further, so I squeezed it in somewhere between the trees. Didn't I mention that these deer wanted to block the passage? The man miraculously managed to get through them, but it took him a long time. So far, we had several stalls in the village where people could buy food and other goods, so no one could complain about anything. At one point, I noticed that some workers were going somewhere in the bushes where I wasn't building anything, so it was suspicious. After a while, I found a place where the peasants were standing around and doing nothing. I decided it was necessary to do a quick inspection with Shrek himself. And suddenly, they all started to go politely to work with their shovels. When I arrived at the place, no one was there. But clearly the workers wanted to hide here from me so that they wouldn't have to work. And there was a lot of work in the village. Here, for example, we had flying roofs that needed extra support. And finally, the first winter was just about to arrive, so the deer began to huddle together even more to keep themselves warmer. After a while, I returned to the mine site and again noticed that the workers did not want to work. Instead, they stood around as if they were waiting for something. By the way, I discovered that Shrek could fly, but somehow he rarely used this ability. The fellow did not look happy, but he still did not move even a little. Unfortunately, another bandit camp appeared on the map, and I still had no army. To remedy this, I started building a marketplace to trade with various merchants. In the meantime, people were slowly finishing building a church. At this point, an inspection had to be carried out. Shrek even got a back massage, and a double one at one point. Generally, after a while, there were a lot of workers here, as if everyone suddenly wanted to prove themselves. Some even started squeezing their way in. Well, I believed that such a band of professionals could handle the construction of the church. After a while, I managed to develop some houses enough to raise the village level again, and was able to use another point. Of course, the best choice was to double the meat obtained from the deer. This will be the meatiest village ever. In the meantime, I managed to gather soldiers from among the peasants who I could send to the nearby bandit camp. The villagers grabbed their weapons and ran towards the enemy. However, the bandits did not want to wait and moved in our direction. They looked confident, but that confidence could always be taken away, adding lots of deer in front of them. It turns out that they were very frightened by this magic trick of Shrek, but they kept moving forward through these deer. I was hoping they'd have more trouble with that, but as you can see, they managed to get through in the end. Therefore, my soldiers had to get ready to fight. They were definitely in a fighting mood. After a while, the bandits rushed at my men, and finally there was a direct confrontation. I quickly run there with Shrek to watch the battle up close, regretting that I could not join the fight myself. Some of the enemies didn't seem to be entirely interested in the battle, so it was won pretty quickly, and the survivors started to run away. There was some artwork on the snow, by the way. Later, my soldiers made their way through a group of magical deer to reach the bandits' camp, which was successfully destroyed, and I was able to decide what kind of reward I wanted. I decided that I would send the resources to my city. Now the men could drop their weapons and get back to work. I was more interested in the guy who separated from the rest of the group and went in another direction. Out of curiosity, I started following him, although I didn't hide. After all, I am the ruler here and my subjects have to do what I tell them to do. So I simply wanted to find out where this worker was going. Admittedly, our journey was very long. At one point we reached a path of some sort, so I thought we would now follow it, but the fellow continued walking ahead. I began to wonder if he even knew where he was going. A few minutes passed, and he continued walking forward. At this point, I was afraid of getting lost, so I preferred to continue following him. Eventually, we came to the border of the map, and interestingly enough, we were able to go further. I think this guy wanted to see if the earth was flat. After a while, we came to a place where there was a goat and a chicken, and even for a moment, there was something else here, and I thought that was the end of the journey. However, my companion moved ahead again. Now, it was really up to me to stay with him and see if he would ever stop. After a few minutes, I saw Ox, who was probably waiting for someone to bring him to the village, so it looked like this was our friend's destination. It should now take him several minutes to get home. Of course, I didn't want to participate in the return journey, so I quickly went back to the village by myself to see that the bodies of some soldiers were still lying there, but someone was slowly taking them away. However, in order to be better prepared for the next battles, I had to designate weapons production in a few houses. As you can see, the residents immediately rushed to work. I was also able to finally build a mansion so that taxes could be collected, and also wooden walls and gates could be constructed. Of course, this building had to be connected to the main route by a long path. In the meantime, I may have increased the number of deer in the village, continuing to block people's passage. I think the villagers were slowly beginning to understand that things were not so ideal here after all, especially when they had to transport some goods quickly to the construction site, and these deer effectively made that impossible. Of course, no one told them to walk this way, but apparently they really liked using shortcuts. Eventually, after much difficulty, they managed to get out somehow. For the moment, this is what this wonderful kingdom looked like, where people worked in a very strange way. The man even looked strange, and the woman was rather practicing some magic tricks. They just wanted to cuddle with Shrek. And seriously, they were doing bows in this bizarre way. All in all, I could now recruit a squad of archers. And then I went to see to the construction of my mansion, which was so popular that all the residents wanted to help build it. Some even carried resources, but unfortunately they had to go around because I had practically blocked up the access to this estate. At least it was apparent that no one was slacking off. Even an ox was walking with a log, but the woman leading it must have been afraid of something because she started to run away. Maybe she saw the ogre and realized that it was not safe here at all. Although after a while, she started to behave normally. Meanwhile, there appeared to be quite a crowd at the mansion. Probably nothing more interesting was going on in the village at the moment. It seemed that everyone had to swing a hammer or axe at least once to contribute to the construction of this mansion. Since the locals were so keen to build everything here, I added even more houses. And after a while, I found the poor woman, who unfortunately continued to run away from something. She was rather not very clever because she couldn't escape from here. Shrek really doesn't need to be feared. However, now it got too weird. Shrek has a wife after all. That woman is unlikely to ever be at peace. I think it was her ox who now had to walk alone. I've never seen anyone run so slowly. Anyway, during the great downpour, the residents managed to finish building the mansion for Shrek. From now on, I was able to collect taxes and, above all, pay tithes to the church, giving away food, which I had in abundance. The next step was to build wooden walls and gates, only this was not an easy task at all, as I wanted to surround the whole village, which is not something the game developer wanted to achieve by adding these elements, but it can be done. It's even harder if you're me, because I clicked something and my wooden wall became too curved, which didn't help the construction at all. The first gate popped up quickly, but that was only the beginning. In the meantime, I called up all my soldiers from the estate. I wanted to send them to the nearest bandit camp. Then I noticed that the men had a very beautiful banner. From now on, it was possible to conquer other villages in the name of a happy Shrek. However, this camp was empty for some reason, so all I had to do was approach and destroy it. But I lived to see a real battle because my opponent wanted to occupy one of the neutral provinces, which I could not allow him to do. Of course, I had to send all of my soldiers to fight, including the peasants who'd taken up their weapons. However, I don't think they all wanted to fight, because one squad started hiding in this house. I tried to get them out of there somehow, but they were not interested in listening to my orders. Clearly, they were counting on not having to get involved in fighting. In the end, I disbanded the squad and wanted to re-establish it in another place to see what would happen now. Somehow, they were more willing to go into battle this time. Unfortunately, my opponent had a rather large army, so I was afraid that I might lose this battle. Therefore, I used mercenaries to increase my chances of victory. Finally, the battle started, although not all my troops had already arrived. Therefore, I slightly backed off my troops to better prepare for the battle. Fortunately, the enemy was sending out troops one at a time, so I was able to fire at the enemies to weaken them. Interestingly enough, Hildebolt didn't seem to want to fight given what he had written to me, but I rule with a tough hand, so this battle had to end in the normal way. It was only then that I noticed that the enemy wanted to charge into my archers, so I had to quickly back them off and get closer with other units. In fact, the enemy was starting to surround me, so I had to retreat again, waiting for reinforcements to arrive, which were slowly coming from the east. Eventually, I managed to get the whole army together in one place, and from now on, I had a better chance of victory. I joined the battle with Shrek to watch everything up close and perhaps scare a few enemies. I also tried to get rid of the archers standing somewhere to the side, but they did not give up and continued to shoot at me, even though they were under fire themselves. There were fewer and fewer enemies now, so I boldly pushed on to the other troops. And a moment later, I was victorious. It was better not to mess with Shrek. The people of my kingdom were really pleased. It seemed like the perfect place to live, but nothing could be further from the truth. The worst was yet to come, and I'm not talking about the creation of this wooden wall. In the area where the battle once took place, there was still one of my soldiers who did not want to move from there. Even winter was not frightening him. Now the most important step was to surround the entire village with a wooden wall, which was possible thanks to some buildings I had placed around the entire kingdom. Now I basically waited until everything was built, which of course took quite a long time. And when everything was almost ready, I did a terrible thing, meaning I started to remove all the deer from my village, so that people would suddenly lose all their food. And the moment the whole village was surrounded by a wooden wall, I increased the tithe to the maximum level, giving all the food to the church every month. Soon everyone would begin to starve. This was Shrek's original plan, to attract people to the village to build a magnificent kingdom here, and when they are no longer needed, take their food, starve them, and then turn them into meat. Well, that is not what we will see here. It was actually the evil Shrek that everyone should be afraid of. He was only interested in having someone build him the mighty Swamp Kingdom. Now it was time to get rid of all these people because they were no longer needed. In fact, I didn't have to wait long. Unfortunately, the first person died in the house, so we couldn't even look at his body. But more and more residents were getting weak on their feet. Now it was only a matter of time before Shrek could consume human flesh. Rest assured, ogres don't attack humans, they just wait for humans to die themselves. Didn't you know that? And the best part is that this guy started to get hungry, but continued to stand here in the cold and admire the beautiful view. And the fence proved to have little effect, as people could still walk through it. You have to admit, Shrek had built a very nice kingdom, with people starving and freezing to death. Now this body already belonged to Shrek. Anyway, Shrek welcomed more refugees because there's never enough free meat. Now a huge group has come to the Swamp Kingdom. Isn't it nice to see your dinner pushing itself onto your plate? Some were already hungry. Interestingly, everyone was crowding into one house as if an important meeting was about to take place. This was actually a good sign, because Shrek had an easier task now. Once everyone was in one place, the action could begin. Some were looking forward to what was about to happen to them. The next step was to set the building on fire. Who doesn't like the taste of fried human flesh? It was a delicacy for Shrek, so at least he had something to eat all winter. The rest of the residents simply turned their backs, as if that meant nothing bad had happened here. A few people wanted to put out the fire, but there was nothing to be saved here anymore. All that was left were the bodies, waiting for Shrek. I think this is proof enough that the ogres are not to be trusted. We'd better leave Shrek with his dinner now because we don't want to meet the same fate. This is what SHREK'S SWAMP looks like, and it's best not to visit this kingdom. Although there are probably some of you who would like to live here. Anyway, thanks for watching this video. I wouldn't be offended if you left a like and subscribed to my channel. Thanks to all the people who have chosen to subscribe so far. If anyone is still here, I encourage you to watch my Cities Skylines 2 video where I created the worst city that no one wanted to escape from. Just click here and watch this masterpiece. It really doesn't hurt, so go ahead and click. Go on. Do it, you filthy peasant!